Good evening, dear friends. How are we all doing? And we are here with This Can Happen. We are up to lesson 4. It's exciting. We're making our way through over here. And of course, I want to thank our course sponsors, Mrs. Leslie Gunsberg and Mrs. Faye Braverman, who are sponsoring this course in loving memory of Michael David Schramm, Leslie's son, of blessed memory. And may the merit of this mitzvah of studying Torah together be for the merit of his soul. And here we are, lesson 4, titled, We Are Getting There. Here's the idea behind this lesson. Over the past 2 classes, over the past 2 weeks, we spoke about what really is Mashiach. We know that it's going to be some type of utopian, beautiful era, but what exactly is it? What's the essence of it? And we explored that Mashiach, the Messianic era, is the very purpose of creation. And there's a purpose. The purpose is that God wants to have a home in this world, right? And the way we make that home in this world is through our doing mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are the magic key, the keys to the universe to bring God into this world. And in that sense, we really put the responsibility on us. Mashiach doesn't happen through some divine intervention, although it does happen. It's a mix. But to a very strong degree, we are active participants. We are partners in bringing Mashiach. And last week, I got some questions. I don't know if it came up in this class, in the night class. But the question did come up, have we been making progress? Think about it. We're at this mission for 3,000 years. To be precise, 3,333 years, as all of you who joined us for Shavuot, right? We spoke about that. So we're at this mission for over 3,000 years. Have we been making progress? Could we look at the story of humanity, at history? Could we look at Jewish history and say, yes, we've been making progress in the direction of making a home for God? Because presumably we should be able to see that. And that's what we want to do in today's class. We want to take a good look at Jewish history. We're not going to be able to do an in-depth look at Jewish history because that would take a whole course. But one class, look at pivotal moments in Jewish history and unlock the key. What exactly is the timeline? Let's map out history and the story of progress of history. You know, let me ask you a question. Feel free to unmute yourself where you could chat it. If you had to give one word for Jewish history, one word to describe the journey of Jewish history, what would that word be? What do you say?
Obstacles.
Obstacles, right? We're constantly being challenged. Definitely been a challenging history. Yeah, Mary Jane, go ahead.
Oh, unbelievable until you learn more. Let's put it that way.
It's a pretty unbelievable history. Okay. What else? How would you describe the journey of Jewish history?
I would say tenuous.
Tenuous, yeah. Right. It's definitely been a difficult journey. Alan?
I'll give you tenacious.
Tenacious. You want to help me define that word?
A lot of gumption, resolve, I guess.
Right, a lot of chutzpah. Right, okay, very good. We've stuck it out. Yeah, that's very good. What else? Yeah, Pam, go ahead.
Hope.
A lot of hope. Yeah, you see, Jewish history was not a Ravi chipped in. That's great. Miraculous. Okay. Yeah, it's miraculous. Yeah. And we're all, I think, pointing to the very same idea that Jewish history was a roller coaster. Jewish history in no way was an easy ride. We've had many high moments, also some very low moments. We've had moments of progress, but that progress seems to have always been challenged. Even just think about the most recent holiday. We're coming from Shavuot. Jews got the Torah. That was definitely a high moment of Jewish history. But that high was challenged 40 days later by the sin of the golden calf. And that was a very spiritually low moment. It seems to have been undermining, right? Tablets were destroyed. It undermined the spiritual high of 40 days ago. And that's really the story of Jewish history. And what I want to do with you is unlock the history of this constant up and down, peaks and valleys. What is really going on in Jewish history? And what we're going to see in today's class are two things. Number one, there's no such thing as a real step backwards in Jewish history. We're not busy taking one step forward, one step backward. We're not even taking two steps forward and one step backward. We are always moving forward. There's always progress, even when things seem to be a spiritually devastating low. That's number one. That's the first, big idea if you want to try to understand history. Even when something's being challenged, something's being broken, there's something devastating happening, it's really part of the process of moving forward, as we will soon see. Right? Everything is very well aligned. Everything's perfectly aligned to bring about the purpose of creation. And number two, as we're going to see, Jewish history is not just us trying to do the best we could with more setbacks and more chutzpah and more resolve and more miracles. Jewish history is filled with phases. There are phases. Every era of history has its own purpose. What does it need to achieve? What new goal does the world need to unlock? Literally, think about it as like a computer game, right? You go through a level and the character, right, Mario, reaches certain benchmarks, and then you move on to the next level. And to a certain degree, I know that's a bit of a crass example, that is the story of history. Jewish history is not random. It is actually very purposeful, with a real system moving forward. So that's the other thing we're going to want to explore, the different spiritual phases, the different eras, what the goals were and what were accomplished in those, what was accomplished in those eras. And specifically to try to figure out what is our current era, which is a fascinating question. What is the unique purpose, the unique mission of our generation, of Jews living in 21st century, which is a very contemporary question. And we could even answer that question. Jewish tradition even gives us the answers to that question. So we got to kind of open up our mind. We got to be open to a whole new perspective at looking at history. We're really, even the downs, the ups and the downs, they're all part of a guided process to move us towards a destiny, towards the purpose of creation. So with that, let's jump in. Now we have the goal of today's class. So this is what we're going to do today. Before we visit history, let's revisit the purpose of creation, as we've been studying it in the past two classes. But I want to kind of crystallize one specific idea. All right? The purpose of creation, as we've learned about it in the past two classes, and as it's written in the works of our sages, in the Midrash. Let's read it together. Text 1 on page 139. Sharon, would you like to read? Are you okay? Well, should we skip you? Okay. All right. Mary Jane, would you like to read? Text 1,
yeah.
page 139.
Yes, God's primordial desire. When the Holy One, blessed be He, created the universe, He desired to have a home in the lowest realm.
All right. Sounds familiar? All right, we've spoken about this. But I want to kind of analyze this with you in a way that we haven't done in the past two lessons. If you break down God's desire, right? The world was created for a purpose, with a desire. You can actually break it down to three core principles. There are three criteria in God's desire of having a home in our world. And most importantly, most critically, the purpose is only realized if all three criteria are met. Now, if you have a pen and paper, that would be best. I would like you to write this down because the whole class, we're going to be going back to these three core principles. Let me first share them with you quickly, and then I'll go and explain them a little bit more in depth. Here it goes. It's on the screen. There are three core principles of God's desire for the purpose of creation. Number one, it must be the lowliest of realms. If it's not the lowest place, then it's no good. Number two, God wants a home. That's a very deliberate word. We're not just saying God wants to be invited. We're saying God wants a home in this world. And number three, this home needs to be created by us through human initiative. So one, lowliest. Number two, home. Number three, through the lowest initiative, through our initiative. Okay, let's explain these three concepts. Number one, lowest. What does lowest mean? Lowest means is that what God wants is that the home that God wants in this world should be in the lowest realm of creation. And what does high and low mean? It means how much godliness, how much revelation of God is there. Is God revealed? Is this realm reflecting God or not? So if the angels make a home for God, that's no good. God needs it to be the lowest sphere of spiritual progression. It needs to be the lowest level, lowest spiritual revelation. That's the first criteria. It needs to be the lowliest level. Number two is home. And again, God does not say, I want to be invited onto earth. God says, I want a home. So let's kind of understand, what does that mean, God wants a home? You know, home is not just another place that we inhabit. We go shopping, we have our office, we have our friends, we go to the park. And then I also go home, right? Home is not just another place. A home is a whole different situation, right? It's qualitatively different. So you tell me, what makes home so different than anywhere else you go? Right? Even a hotel room, right, which is your own private space, or an Airbnb, you rent the whole house for yourself. It's not home, right? It's home sweet home. There's nothing like home. So what about home is so special? What defines the quality of being at home?
Most comfortable.
You're most comfortable. That's right. What else?
Familiar.
It's very familiar. Michelle? Sorry,
I was going to say those two words. Yeah,
what were you going to say, Michelle?
the same two words already. Comfortable and familiar.
Comfortable, familiar. Mary Jane, what was that?
Safe.
Safe. Anything else?
Comfortable,
Alan, you have to unmute.
predictable,
Predictable. All right. Again, it's a safe space. Yes, Alan.
It's of your own curation, so to speak. It's your stuff. It's reflective of what you value.
It's a full reflection of you.
Challenging.
It's challenging, Mary Jane?
I think so, yes.
I wouldn't say that. No.
Okay. Exactly. I'm not sure. Is a home challenging? I'll tell you. I think it's what all of you were kind of touching upon. But if you want to get to the essence of what makes home different, it's that you are not you when you are anywhere else. You are fully you at home. Your essence is at home at home. You see, anywhere else you go, outside of your home, you are actually not fully present. You are conforming. You are hiding yourself. You are, you're actually showing constraint or inhibition. You have to act in a certain way. There's an etiquette. No one is at home in an office because you need to be a certain way. And in an office, there's a dress code. There's a way you act. There's, you have to conform. When you go shopping, you are conforming to the etiquette of a supermarket. The only place where you get to be just you the way you want to be there. No inhibition, no constraints. You're not holding back who you really are. You really get to be you is at home. So the quality of home is that your essence is revealed there. That is the quality. It's not just that you're comfortable. Why are you comfortable? You are most comfortable because you have no guards up. It's you. I am me at home. That's it. So when God says, I want to have a home in this lowly world, God is saying, I want my essence to be fully expressed in this world. I want to be fully here, not just invited here, not just in a certain limited way. God wants to have a full home where God's full essence can shine, which is a deep idea. We got to explain it. Hopefully, through with the as we progress through today's class, we'll kind of understand what that means a little bit more. God's essence wants to be at home. But let's read text 2, page 141. We are going to read this concept. Alan, would you like to read text 2?
Sure. Home is where the essence is. The emphasis on transforming this material world specifically into a home for God informs us that the ultimate goal is for godliness to be revealed here in the tangible reality of this world to the extent and naturalness that is analogous to the way a person is when found within his or her own home. When we take a stroll or pay a visit to a friend, we are forced to limit our self-expression to the degree that is appropriate for our present location. By contrast, when we are in our own homes, we can be ourselves openly and to the fullest extent. Similarly, the revelation of godliness must be overt and with full expression, for God desired a home in the lowest realm. Furthermore, Jewish law insists that we must not view a king while he is without clothing, for that would undermine respect for the monarchy. Despite that, when he is in his own home, there are specific instances in which the king will indeed be without clothing. Similarly, the ultimate purpose for God's desire to transform our material reality into a home, specifically, is that. Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi explains in Tanya, chapter 36, God longs to finally reveal and express himself without any garment. God conveyed this desire to us through a prophecy regarding the future redemption, at which point the goal of establishing a dwelling for God in the material reality will have been achieved. No longer will your teacher garb himself, Isaiah 30:20, which means, per Rashi's commentary, that he will no longer conceal himself from you with a robe or garment.
God wants to be fully revealed in this world at home. If God is not at home, which means if his full essence is not invited into our world, no good. So that's criteria number 2, right? Criteria number 1, it has to be the lowest level of reality. Number 2, it has to be a home for God. And number 3, it has to be through human initiative. Why does it need to be through human initiative? Because nobody is ever at home when they force themselves in. You're not at home if you force yourself into a home. You're called a squatter. Right? That's not home. Home means that you are invited in, you belong here, that the home itself invites you in. So if God were to show up into our world and force himself into our world, that would not be called God having a home. That would be called God imposing himself upon our world. That would not mean that the world was transformed to become a place which is hospitable and, compatible for God. So criteria number 3 is that the ones that make the home are us, humans, in bodies, inhabitants of the lowest level, inhabitants of this lowest world. Only we can make the home, not even God. Let's read that in text 3. Michelle, would you like to read page 142?
Yeah. God's intention in having a home in the lowest realm is for the lowest realm to become a home for God on its own terms. For that reason, the home must be achieved through the efforts of human beings, the souls of Israel in corporeal, is that right? Bodies.
Yeah.
For only then are the lowest realms themselves reformed into a home for God. By contrast, if the home would be imposed through a transformative revelation from above, the lowest realms themselves would not be, on their own terms, a home for God.
There you go. God wants it that we, through our own initiative, our own choice, our own doing, bring God into this world. So here we have it. Let's summarize it. I'm going to put it back on the screen. You could also see it on your books on page 143. For the purpose of creation to be fulfilled, we have to fulfill these 3 core principles, these 3 criteria. It has to be the lowliest of realms. God has to be fully at home, which means God's essence is invited in. And number 3 needs to be created by us through human initiative. Only when we reach all 3 of these criteria, only then is God's purpose and desire fulfilled, and only then does Mashiach come. So these are the 3 keys for Mashiach to come. It has to be a very low world. We have to be touching, we have to be in touch, and we have to be inviting in God's essence. And we have to be the ones to kind of make this world into a home for God.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
By saying the lowliest of realms, it's not just the low realm versus the high realm. So it speaks to, some vaster number than just 2. Is that finite? Is that defined? Or is that really a moving target?
No, it is defined. It is defined. It's a good question. Kabbalah speaks of 4 general worlds, 4 realms. Each one is a devolution in its descent, less God, less revelation in each world. We inhabit the lowest world, so we are world 4 out of 4. And even more specifically, within each world, there are 10 levels. And the same thing, each level is lower than the level ahead of it. We are in the lowest level of the lowest world. So we definitely live in that lowly realm. That's us. Yeah. Okay. Now that we understand this core idea, all right, this was all a big introduction. Now that we understand the core idea of what God's purpose of creation is, now we can make sense of history. Now let's revisit history. Let's look at the spiritual ups and downs and try to figure out what is happening. Are these just good moments followed by failures? Or is there actually a rhyme and a reason, a purpose, a progression of reaching, slowly marching towards achieving this goal? We don't have time to look at all of Jewish history, but we're going to be looking at 4 major historical, let's call them acts, 4 phases of Jewish history, 4 ups and downs. And I want to put this up over here on the screen as I'll introduce to you what these 4 steps are, and then we'll go through them together. Act 1 that we'll be focusing on today is the Garden of Eden and the Tree of Knowledge. Right there you have history's first up and first down. First high, first low. Garden of Eden was definitely a high, and the sin of the Tree of Knowledge was a low. Next act is Abraham's monotheistic revolution. That's the high. And then the Egyptian slavery the lo that followed. Act 3 will be the Exodus, the experience at Mount Sinai, and then the lo of the golden calf. And Act 4 will talk about the holy temples and the exile that we are currently in. So we're going to take a look at each of these acts and look at what happened good and what happened bad. Try to make sense of it and see also how we've been making progress through these 4 different phases or these 4 different acts of history. Sounds exciting? You ready? All right, here we go. Let us begin. Let us begin in the beginning. Bereshit, right? We are up to Act 1. Act 1 is at the beginning, and God creates a beautiful world. The world is called, or humanity inhabits a place called the Garden of Eden. A beautiful place, not only physically, but also spiritually. Let's read how our sages describe the Garden of Eden. Elke, would you like to read text 5, page 148? All right, go for that. Unmute. Oh, Elke, I don't think you unmuted. Want to try again? There you go.
Okay, 148 you said?
Yes, text 5.
Okay, a divine garden. I have come to my garden from the Song of Songs. The verse does not speak of a garden, gan in Hebrew, but rather my garden, gani, for the sake of implying genuni, my marital home, the location that originally served as my primary residence. For was not God's primary presence originally located within the lowest realm?
So here we have it, the spiritual description of what the Garden of Eden was like. And we see here that it's a perfect world, created and inhabited by God. God is in this world. And the humanity is created within this environment. It seems like God got what he wanted. God wanted a home in this world. And what do you have in the Garden of Eden? God is here. So you tell me, was God's purpose, was God's desire fulfilled with the Garden of Eden? Gail is saying no. Why not, Gail? Want to unmute? Yeah, Gail, you have to unmute.
I said, I guess to a point it was.
To a point it was, but let's look back. When we said God wanted to have a home in this world, there were 3 criteria. I'll put it up here on the screen. Oh, Max is writing, it was imposed. The Garden of Eden was imposed. We didn't create it. Let's go through these 3 things. Lowly realm. Lowly realm. Was the Garden of Eden in the lowest realm? What do you say? Michelle is saying no. Why not, Michelle? Unmute.
I guess it's so beautiful and it didn't look like the Garden of Eden was lacking in anything.
Right, meaning if you look at it, the Garden of Eden was not a very low place.
Right.
God was actually revealed. Adam was born, or Adam was created, and Adam right away knew there's a God. He was so certain of God's existence as much as he knew that he was in existence. All the animals, every creature was aware of God. So this is not the low level that God is talking about.
No.
This is a very elevated spiritual place. It's God's garden. God is fully revealed there. So number 1, if we look at this list, we can definitely say, was it lowly realm? The answer is no. So right away there, we see that it wasn't really fulfilling the purpose the way God intended it to. Was it God's essence in this world? Okay, this is a tricky question. I'm going to say no, and we'll see soon why. In the Garden of Eden, it wasn't God's essence. So it couldn't have been called a home for God. And was it built by us?
No.
And right, no. We had no part of that. It was imposed upon the world. Nobody invited God in. God just put himself in our world. So if you look right over here, the Garden of Eden looked beautiful, but it actually was nowhere close to fulfilling God's purpose in our world, that he should have a home here in the lowest world built by us. So what happens? So what happens is paradise has to be broken down because paradise is no good. You see, sometimes you build a model at the beginning. Like I know you do this sometimes. Like I know that when they do renovations on a kitchen, if somebody gets a kitchen redesigned, what designers will do, they'll make cardboard cutouts. And they'll kind of help the owners of the home see what the layout and what the plan for the kitchen is by literally bringing cardboards to show what the counter is. Here's the fridge, here's the oven. So the cardboard cutout gives you a little idea what your kitchen is going to look like, but obviously it is not the kitchen. So the Garden of Eden was actually nothing more than the model, the cardboard cutouts for what the world could and should look like. But in no way was the Garden of Eden what the world really needed to be. As we see, it wasn't low, it wasn't God's essence, and it wasn't built by us. And this is where what comes in? The sin of the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve committed a sin. In a certain sense, you could say that the sin was a setup. They were meant to commit the sin. God even set them up to commit the sin. Sounds a little bit radical. But it was kind of by divine design that the Garden of Eden was not meant to last. This is only a model. This is not meant to stay here. Adam and Eve commit the sin. They destroy the Garden of Eden. They kind of they push away God from the world, and the world becomes a dark place. Only after the sin did the world become a place of spiritual darkness, became a godless world. In paradise, God was apparent. The world only became low because of the sin of the tree of knowledge. And that was the first step of history beginning its march towards its destiny. The world needed to be a low place, a place of utter spiritual darkness. And Adam and Eve's sin plunged the world into that utter darkness. Let us read text 6b. Pam, would you like to read? You have to unmute. Text 6b, let's read on page 151.
Okay. Purposeful eviction. The deeper spiritual reason for Adam's eviction from the Garden of Eden is because God's ultimate goal for creation is that he should have a home in the lowliest realm. This goal demands that God's home be fashioned, A, within the realm that is the absolute lowest, and B, using the natural material of the lowest realm itself. Adam was therefore dispatched from the Garden of Eden to work the earth, meaning to make the earth's physical dimension of space receptive to divine revelation. This way, A, even the lowest plane of reality that lacks the overt spirituality of the Garden of Eden will become a home for God, and B, the divine home will be fashioned from the reality of material existence.
There we have it. Humanity, mankind needed to leave a spiritual oasis and descend into a physical world, a crass world where there's no God, no light, only darkness. All right. And that was the biggest accomplishment of phase one, of act one of creation. The world now is a low place. Until today, we live in a dark world. We are still living in the environment, in the consequences of the post-sin reality. Adam and Eve sinned. They made the world into a dark place, a godless world. That's where we live in. And now finally, we could work on building a home for God in a low world. That's the accomplishment of Act 1, because this world is in a space of darkness. We could start trying to fulfill God's purpose. All right, so there we have it. Garden of Eden was a model. It didn't serve any of the criteria that God wanted the world to reach. It was destroyed. And now the world's a low place. We can move on to Act 2. Human history marches on, post the sin. And now we enter Act 2, Phase 2. What happens post the sin? The world becomes a dark place. The world loses its connection with God, meaning its revealed connection to God. And we know what happened. The world became a very bad place. Humanity became spiritually and morally bankrupt. They lost any connection to God. Adam remembered God. So Adam had a connection to God. His children, a little bit also. But once the generations go on, they lost all sense of connection with God. And it truly became a godless world. Truly the lowest realm. And that's when Abraham, 2,000 years after Adam and Eve were evicted from the Garden of Eden, close to 2,000 years later, Abraham walks into the scene. Abraham discovers God and begins a revolution. Let us read the description of Abraham's story, the way it's told in Maimonides. The way Maimonides tells us a story. Fascinating text. Text 7, page 155. Gail, are you up to a bit of a long text? Or did you just read, Gail? No, that was Pam. All right, Gail. Go
Okay.
Text 7, page 155.
Gotcha. The revolutionary. After this mighty personage, Abraham was weaned, he began to ponder deeply. Though he was a young child, he began to contemplate by day and by night. He had no teacher, nor was there anyone to inform him. Rather, he was mired in Ur-Kasdim's population of foolish idolaters. His father, mother, and all the people around him worshipped idols. He would worship along with them, but his heart was busy analyzing everything, and he gained a clear understanding. Ultimately, he arrived at the true way and understood the path of righteousness through his accurate comprehension. He realized that there was one God, that he created everything, and that there is no other God among all that exists. Abraham was 40 years old when he became fully aware of his creator. He then used his recognition and knowledge of the creator to formulate presentations for the population of Ur-Kasdim and to debate them, informing them that they were not following the true path. When he won them over with the strength of his arguments, the king desired to execute him. His life was spared through a miracle, and he relocated to Sharon. He then began a public campaign, loudly proclaiming to all humanity and informing them that in all the universe there is but one God, and that to him alone is it appropriate to worship. He traveled to publicize his message everywhere, rallying people in city after city, kingdom after kingdom, until he arrived in the land of Canaan. At every location, he proclaimed God's existence as it is stated. Abraham proclaimed there in the name of the eternal God, Genesis 21:33. When the people would rally to him, questioning him regarding his statements, he would explain to each individual according to their understanding until he had brought that individual back to the true path. Eventually, thousands and myriads rallied around Abraham. They are the folk referred to in the Torah as people of the house of Abraham, Genesis 17:23, in whose hearts he firmly planted this great fundamental principle.
That's the story of Abraham. So God is really lost on human civilization for hundreds and hundreds of years. And finally, God is only invited back into the world in the year 1948 after creation. But here's the key idea. How did Abraham discover God? Is it because God showed up to his door one day and said, "Hey, Abraham, here I am. Start serving me"? Is that what happened? No. This is very important. Abraham discovered God on his own with the human quest of curiosity, the human desire to challenge the status quo. Abraham was a curious boy, and he spent years and years and years, till the age of 40, realizing through the power of his own intellect that there's a God and that he alone is the only one who runs the world. There's no other force of nature. God is the only force of nature. And it began a revolution, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. We know Abraham made a massive revolution of bringing God to the world. And you can definitely say Abraham brought the world to a point where the world was becoming more of a home for God. Things are looking good. Okay, let's go back and ask our question. Was the home that Abraham built for God, did that fulfill the criteria? Let's put it up over here on the screen. Let's go through them. Was it a lowly realm? What do you say? Was the world lowly? In the times of Abraham, was it a low world? What do you say? Michelle is saying no. Why do you say no, Michelle? The world wasn't low? Michelle says no. Anyone says yes? What was the world then? Elke is saying yes. Why do you say yes, Elke?
Because God was not revealed.
Right?
God was removed.
God wasn't there. God was not apparent in the world. So we could really put a yes for the world being a lowly realm. Yeah, the world was objectively a low place. There was no God, there was no spirituality, and Abraham brought God into that world. Was he making a home for God? Was he inviting in God's essence? Yes or no? It sounds like yes, but the real answer is no. And I'll have to explain that to you. Just like in the Garden of Eden, it wasn't yet God's essence. Was it built by us? Was it built by humans? Was it God? Was it humans inviting God in? The answer is yes, right? God was not imposing himself onto us. Humans on their own were discovering God. But let's talk about this. But there was a deficiency. There was a deficiency in what Abraham did. On the one hand, the world was a low place because this was post the sin. Post the sin, the world is an objectively low place with no revelation of godliness. And Abraham invited God in, or built this home for God by his own initiative. But it wasn't God's essence. But let's explain this. Let's go through this. This is a beautiful idea, but a little bit of a deep idea. You know, I saw once a storybook, a children's storybook. The title of the storybook was "My Teacher Lives in the School Building." My teacher lives, or I think maybe my teacher sleeps at school. And it's a book that brings up the idea that little children think that their teachers, their whole life is in school. They have a bed in school, they eat in, like their whole identity is a teacher. I think this is somewhat of like a shock to any kid the first time that they meet their teacher in the grocery store. What are you doing in my world? Right? You're the teacher. You belong in the school building. You're going shopping in Kroger. What's the idea? Little children, their first way of looking at their teacher is only through their own point of reference. This human being in relation to me as a teacher, so they are nothing more than a teacher. And then it takes a certain maturity to realize that no, the fact that they teach is just their job. It's just something that they do. It's their day job. But they're really a full human being, and they have a home, and they have a spouse, and they have children, and they have their own desires and their own hobbies and their own interests. So there's always that thing of where first sometimes you see a person in a limited fashion. You look at a person only the way that they relate to you. And then you get to know the person the way they are objectively. I think little children have the same thing when they think about their parents. Little children look at their parents and they think that their parents are parents, nothing more. Like as if the whole life of their parent is to be a parent who takes care of them as children. And you get older and you realize that your parents are actually full autonomous human beings with their own desires and their own hiccups and their own feelings, right? And that, that's like a maturity, My parents are their own human beings. And yeah, I'm a very important part of their life. They take care of me. They love me, but they're not enslaved to me, right? Their whole existence is not just. So the same thing is about God. When Abraham discovered God, and when Abraham shared the message of God to the world and shared the message of God with his family, how did he relate to God? If you look in the text here, you'll see they related to God as a creator. What's God? The creator of heaven and earth. In other words, their whole perception of God was only in the context of my existence. They didn't know of a God that is beyond the creator. They weren't aware of the God that transcends, that's totally beyond the laws of nature. That was the generation of Abraham. The generation of Abraham, I want to put this back over here. Yes, they invited God into the world, but not God's essence. They were only in touch with God as a creator, not God as a God that is beyond creation. Does that make sense?
Question for you. Would that be, is it logical to consider that would be a natural outcropping of the fact that everyone was an idolater at that point, and their frame of reference was based on appealing to multiple gods in order to get a certain outcome?
Possibly, but I think it's even simpler than that. When you only know God through his interaction with us, then you have a limited understanding of what God is. God is nature. God being larger than nature, God being above nature, that's something which Abraham didn't get to experience here. He only met God the way God is in the universe. And that is why Abraham, despite all of his accomplishments and all the efforts of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the vision of what the world needs to get to was not yet complete. And therefore, history has to continue to march on. And here's where we get to the low of Act 2, the valley of Act 2. You see, when God finally did reveal himself to Abraham, only when Abraham was a very old man already. For decades and decades, Abraham was believing in God and building up a whole belief system of monotheism. But then when God finally revealed himself to Abraham, God told Abraham, you're going to be the father of nations. There's going to be a Jewish people. And God right away says, but the Jews are going to have to go down to Egypt to be enslaved and to suffer. So Egypt was not a mistake. Egypt wasn't even a punishment. This was always part of the plan. And that's really the next dramatic moment of Jewish history, the period of Egyptian slavery, which was a very painful, very traumatic time for us as a people. But it played actually a very, very important role of moving the Jewish people and all of humanity forward to realizing the vision and the purpose of creation.
Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
At what point did did the group known as the Hebrews form? I mean, that's who went into Egypt before we became Jews.
Mhm.
Can you shed a little light on that?
Yeah, that was the Hebrews were Abraham's family, only his family, and not even all of his family. It was really limited to Jacob's children. Jacob's children, meaning there are other people who are followers of Abraham, but they weren't part of that family. They weren't part of that group. It was a different thing.
Okay.
There were thousands upon thousands of followers in the belief of monotheism, but they weren't Hebrews. They weren't what became the Jewish people. The Jewish people are only the bloodline of Abraham through Isaac, through Jacob, through the 12 tribes. Let's talk for a moment. What we see over here is the Jewish people need to mature in their relationship to God, but they need to suffer for hundreds of years. Why? Why do you need to suffer? And I want to take a moment and kind of back out a little bit and ask this question. We all know that real growth or real change only happens with pain, right? It's always inevitably associated with pain. No pain, no gain. So my question for you is why? Why does it need to be painful in order for it to be gainful? Is that a word? Gainful? Why does it need to be that way?
If it comes too easily, it won't mean anything. You have to realize what it takes to get to
So
what
that's a technicality. You're not going to appreciate it unless it's hard. But why does it need to be hard? Why does change not happen unless it's challenging? Why is that? So I'll tell you. You see, real change always involves abandoning what was to make room for what could be. If you don't abandon what you had, then you're only just building upon your old vision, the old version. So you could get something which is comparably greater, but you can never get something which is incomparably greater. If you want to get something that's radically different, you need to destroy what was to make room for something brand new. If you don't destroy, then yeah, there could be progress, but we call that linear progress. Like I've once heard it being put, if you think what you've always thought, and you say what you've always said, and you do what you always did, you'll have what you always had. Right? Things won't change much. Something really new, you have to demolish what was there. All right, here's a little video to bring out this idea. This is a great video. You'll love this. Here we go.
If you want to be something incomparably greater than you've ever been, then you have to lose everything that you've ever had. And the metaphor for that is the seed. Take a seed is meant to become a tree. That's what its destiny is. But if the seed doesn't want to stop being a seed, just wants to become bigger and bigger of a seed, what's going to happen? You can have a seed that is 1,000 times bigger. You have a seed that's 1,000,000 times bigger than what it started as. What are you going to get? You're going to get a big, giant seed. The only way that seed's going to become a tree is you put it in the ground, you bury it alive, and it starts to rot and decompose. And when it loses all semblance of its old structure, when it's completely wasted, you know, you had a perfectly good seed, and you know, a bird could eat it, I suppose. I mean, it has its own value. And then you throw it in the dirt, you throw it away, it becomes ruined, and then when it's completely broken down, it becomes a tree. So there's a saying that when you're down to nothing, God's up to something. If you want to become something incomparably greater, if you want to be comparably greater, you want to matriculate, if you want to go from level 1 to 10 or 10 to 100 or even 1 to 1,000,000, then you can just build upon what you've had. But if you're ready to be completely reinvented, to be something completely new, that only happens when you let go of everything you've ever been.
Simple but deep. So the Jewish people needed an Egypt to challenge who they were, to break down who they were, to make room for something brand new. So what did Egypt need to break down? So I'll tell you. The Egyptian slavery challenged and literally pulled down the Jewish people's belief in God. The Jews were this close to abandoning God altogether. Egypt experience was so traumatizing for the Jews that this whole people who have this legacy going back to Abraham of believing in God was on the balance. The Jews stopped believing. We know this. The Jews became very big idolaters in Egypt. Now, why is that? Why did Egypt challenge the Jews' faith? So you could say, well, whenever we suffer, it challenges our faith. Could you blame anybody post-Holocaust who had a hard time believing in God after the Holocaust? But there's something much deeper happening over here. If God is nature, if God is synonymous with nature, and you see nature destroying you, you kind of feel that God is being self-sabotaged by himself. Nature itself is destroying anything good in the world. Because what's nature? Nature is that the mighty get to dominate the weak. The big eat the small. And evil people get to destroy. So the whole world that the Jews were believing in, and the fact that God is a creator of the world itself was really challenging that whole notion. If this is nature and this is God, then what do we have left? Just eternal suffering? So because the Jews' version of God was synonymous with nature, what is God? Nature. And they're seeing that they're going through the story of nature, and nature itself, the world itself, is tearing them to pieces. It challenged the faith of the Jews in God as a creator. But you know what? That was perfect. That's what needed to happen. Because the Exodus story tore apart the Jews' belief in God. It's like that the Jews could now adopt a whole new relationship with God, a whole new faith. They were ready to accept a radically new perspective on what God is. So the exile destroyed the Abrahamic revolution to a degree, right? It challenged that. And here's where we move on to Act 3. Act 3 of human history is when God comes back into the picture and says, Jews, I'm here to save you. And when God shows up, you know what the Jews say? We don't believe you. Moses tells God, the Jews won't believe me. Now, why won't the Jews believe God? You know why? Because look, nature, we're stuck in the laws of nature. God himself has his hands tied. The Jews didn't see a way out. But God told the Jews, you don't know me. You think I'm just a creator. You think I'm bound by the laws of nature. No. All of a sudden, the Jews start seeing 10 plagues. Wow. Nature could be broken? God is larger than nature? God can make water turn into blood, and hail could combine with fire, and then seas could split. Water could stand up like a wall. What was this doing to the Jews? It was a truth that was being revealed to the Jews. God is not just a creator. There's a God that exists totally beyond, transcends nature. And the Jews were getting to know that God. And then the Jews met that God face to face at Mount Sinai. They saw a God that the whole world became still. Not a single bird chirped, nothing. The whole world went quiet when God arrived on Mount Sinai. The Jews met the God that even Abraham didn't meet. The essence of God. God the way he is beyond nature. And we see this idea in the way God first introduced himself to the Jewish people. Just like, when we meet new people, we say, hello, my name is this. God introduced himself to the Jewish people. Let's read this in text 10a. David, would you like to read? 10a, page 164.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am your God, who extracted you from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage.
Okay. Now, we all know this is the way the Ten Commandments begin. I am God who took you out of Egypt. There's a famous question the commentaries asked. Why is God introducing himself as the one who took you out of Egypt? Shouldn't God say, I'm God who created heaven and earth? That seems a little bit more impressive. Yeah, I made this whole place. Why is God kind of limiting who he is by saying, yeah, I'm the God who just took you out of Egypt? It's a good question. But David, let's continue. This is where the key lies. Let's read text 10b, also page 164.
The biblical commentators wondered why God emphasized, I am your God who extracted you from the land of Egypt, instead of, I am your God who created heaven and earth. Surely the latter demonstrates a far greater feat. The explanation is that the Exodus demonstrates something far more wondrous than creation. The Exodus demonstrates that after creating the heaven and earth with a defined set of rules of nature, God is nevertheless able to alter the natural order and to conduct the universe in an entirely supernatural manner.
This was important. This was when the Jews got in touch with God's essence. Only when the Jews left Egypt did they meet a God who's beyond nature. And ever since then, that's the Jewish model of God. We don't only relate to God as a creator, we relate to God for what God really is. A God that's totally beyond nature. And only because we are in touch with God's essence, because all of us were there at Sinai. It says every single Jewish soul was present at Mount Sinai. Only because of that, we could then work on bringing God into this world, God's essence. So the big accomplishment that happened through the Jews coming out of Egypt was now we are in touch with God's essence. The Garden of Eden made the world into a low place. The Exodus made the Jews in touch with God's essence. But God shows up and reveals himself in this world at Mount Sinai. Let me ask you, was God's vision fulfilled? Let's go back to our question. Let's go through the three criteria over here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Exodus and Sinai, the revelation. Right, do you see my screen over here? Is that working? Okay. Was the world low? What do you say? And the answer is yes. Ever since post the sin, the world was a low place. Were the Jews now in touch with God's essence? And we could say yes. Even the patriarchs weren't. But now God revealed himself. Now the Jews were in touch with God's essence. And the Jews could invite not just God as a creator, but God as God into the world. But here's a question. Was it built by us? Did we invite God into the world? And the answer is no. When God performed miracles for us, took us out of Egypt, revealed himself on Mount Sinai, we had no part of that. God was imposing himself upon us, but we didn't invite God in. And that was the problem. God was doing all the work and we were just coming along for the ride. But God wants a home. God wants the world to be transformed. And a transformed world only happens if we are the ones to initiate that transformation. If we're not the ones doing it, that's not called a home for God. That's not called the transformed world. That means a world that has to conform to an imposition by God, right? Real change only happens from within. You know that? You know, there's once a philosopher. As a side gig, he had a hot dog stand. So there's once a guy who goes to the philosopher's hot dog stand. So he buys a hot dog for $1.50. He gives $2. He says, I want my change. So you know what the philosopher told him? Change only comes from within. Change only comes from within. So if the world is going to change from a low place, from a place which is hostile to God, to a place which is hospitable for God, that can only happen if we do it. It cannot be imposed. So while the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai and the Exodus was a very important moment, a watershed moment in the story of human progress, because finally humanity was in touch with God's essence, and therefore we could bring God's essence into the world, we were not the ones doing it. And therefore, the vision was still incomplete. And therefore, what happens next? We have the next low. What's the low of Act 3? The Jews regress. It doesn't last. That moment of divine revelation doesn't last because we're not changed. God imposed himself upon us. So while God was revealed, it was exciting. As soon as God left, we regress. We serve the golden calf. And the tablets get broken. The model of God forcing himself upon us is broken. You know the joke? There's once a European rabbi. We're running out of time, but okay. But a joke is always good. There's once a European rabbi in the early 20th century, early 1900s. He was visiting America on a fundraising mission. A lot of rabbis who had a yeshiva needed to fundraise to come to America. And America, of course, was very secular. And in New York, the American Jews tell this European rabbi that in America, our kids don't go to yeshiva. Our kids go to public school. But every Sunday, there's a Sunday school. And believe me, the American kids know just as much as the European Jewish kids know for going to cheder and yeshiva all day. So this rabbi says, it's amazing. A few hours of Sunday school, they know everything. He says, and they say, yeah, you could even come test the kids. So he goes test the kids. So he goes into a classroom of a Sunday school and he says, kids, who broke the tablets? All the kids get nervous. And one kid says, I promise you, none of us did it. So this European rabbi looks at the teacher and says, what's going on over here? The teacher says, I'm telling you, this boy is very honest. If he says he didn't do it, I can tell you he didn't do it. This rabbi is very disappointed at these children's knowledge. He goes to the principal and tells the principal what happened. So the principal says, Rabbi, please, let's not make a big deal out of it. It costs $25. I'll pay for it. All right. That's the idea. Okay. So the tablets were broken, which means that old model, Act 3, is not going to last. And this is where we move on to Act 4 of creation. Act 4 is where the Jews now have to fight on their own, make a home for God on their own. And this is where we move on to Act 4 of creation, which is when the Jews build a home for God. They build the home. That home for God takes the form of the tabernacle, the holy temples. So the tabernacle was a temporary home for God that traveled with them in the desert. Once they got to Israel, they eventually built the holy temple, a permanent home for God in Jerusalem on Temple Mount, the first temple, the second temple. And the best part, that this home was built by the Jews. We built it. So this seems to now fulfill all the criteria. So let's go through the list. The temples. Was it in the lowest realm? The answer is yes, right? Post-sin, it's a low world. Were the Jews in touch with God's essence? The answer is yes. Was it built by us? Did we build the temple? Not completely. You see, there's a certain deficiency in the temple era, which is why Mashiach didn't come then, because it didn't yet fulfill the purpose. You see, who commanded us to build a temple? God. God told us to do it, we did it. But even more fundamentally, there were a lot of incentives. There was a lot of immediate feedback. In the temple times, we experienced God. We had the prophets. You know, we got daily messages from God. Can you imagine if every single day we would get on Twitter what God has to say today? I'm saying that's pretty extraordinary that people lived at a time where you literally got messages from God on a daily basis. And not only that, but you were able to see God's presence in the temple. When you went to the temple, you saw God, you witnessed God. Our sages tell us that there were 10 open miracles. Nobody had to convince you that miracles were happening. You saw miracles unfolding in front of your eyes in the temple. I'm saying, can you imagine that? But that made a problem because, yes, the Jews built the temple, but there was so much spiritual feedback that not necessarily could this be totally attributed to the Jews. You can't say that this was self-driven. The Jews are inviting God in. You know, there's constant feedback. Do the Jews really own it? Do the Jews really mean it? Are they truly building a home for God in this world? Like my Mendel. My Mendel has a problem right now that every single time I give him a compliment, my 4-year-old boy, he asks me for a candy. I'm like, no, Mendel, we're past that stage. You do good because we do good, not because I give you candy every time. Like, you know, so if you think about it, in the temple times, we were getting a bunch of spiritual candies. We build a temple, we're hearing back from God every day. We see the results. But does that mean that we, inhabitants of the lowest realm, are we really the ones building a home for God? And that is why I put up over here on the screen that at the end of the day, this last criteria, was it built by us? And the answer is not completely, not really. When you're getting so much constant positive feedback from God, it can't be fully attributed back to you, which is why we have the next stage of Jewish history, our current phase, exile. Temples get destroyed. But more than losing our temple and more than losing our homeland, we lost revelation. No more revelation, no more miracles. No more could you go to Israel to witness God. No more could you go to Jerusalem and literally see the miracles on Temple Mount. We entered a phase of history where there's utter darkness. And this was the ultimate test for Jews. Would we create a space for God under the darkest conditions? Will we still be motivated to do good even if we're not getting any feedback? That was the test of exile. And it's specifically in this exile, when there's only darkness and no light, only in exile, specifically because we don't see God, that our positive actions can truly be attributed to us. When we build a home for God, when we bring God into our lives, when we bring God into our universe, for the first time in history, we are truly owning it. It's only coming because we are being self-driven, we're motivated. It's not because God is compelling us, it's because we are in touch with our souls. But exile's been going on for 2,000 years, close. It's been a darn long time, no? Haven't we proven the point? Seemingly we have. Jews have been in exile, and as we've spoken at the beginning of class, we've had chutzpah, we've had such resolute, we've fought hard. We're still fighting for the Jewish mission. We haven't given up even though we don't see the miracles anymore. We don't see God anymore. And here we come to what I think is the most important part of today's class. Act 5. We are right now, the modern age, we are at the last frontier of the Jewish mission. There's still a problem. There was still a problem even throughout the entire exile. You know what the problem was? Jews were being persecuted. Why is that a problem? Because it's easier to be a Jew when the whole world hates you. And it's easier to be a Jew when the whole world throws you into a ghetto and into a shtetl. And it's easier to be a Jew when your religion is under attack. Because what happens when a Jew is provoked? That's when we react. So we've actually successfully passed the test of building a home for God even under persecution. But the exile just shifted in recent times. Starting somewhere about 70 years ago, post-Holocaust, but especially 30 years ago, after the fall of communism. The Jews have entered a phase that we've never had before. Freedom, affluence. The world is not anymore driving us mad. We're not being persecuted anymore. We could be Jews. We could be Americans. We're accepted. Now, of course, I'm not saying there's no anti-Semitism, but relatively speaking, we are in a very unique time of history, the era of freedom. Now, you tell me, when's a bigger challenge to be a good Jew? When you're living under conditions of persecution or when there's freedom? What's a bigger test to the Jewish faith? What would you say? Alan, what do you say?
I think there's an argument to be made for both.
All right, let's hear.
Well, I suppose that, you know, when you're under persecution, you certainly, to your point, you cling to the things that you're being reviled for, and you're in close proximity to one another. It's easier to hold to your rituals, but it might be harder to practice them because of the persecution that's going on. In the inverse, with freedom and with free will, there's nothing compelling us to live in a particular place. There's nothing compelling us to necessarily fight for something that is being taken away from us, because it's not. And accordingly, it's easier to let some of that lapse.
Yeah. You see, in exile, even though we're not getting any positive feedback, we were getting negative feedback. There was still an outside force compelling us to be Jews. Anti-Semites many times made us into good Jews. You know, history has shown, including in religious people, there were religious families that sacrificed their lives. They put life and limb to keep Judaism alive in Russia. When they came to America, there's no more threats. All of a sudden, they chilled out. When you can't do it, then all of a sudden you're fighting. And here that you could do it, you give up on it here? What's the logic of that? Because that's the hardest. When you're being hounded, when you're being persecuted, and then you're a Jew, is it still you? Could it be attributed to you? Is it really coming only because you're in touch with your soul? Or maybe is there an outside force that's squeezing you to be a Jew? The ultimate test of a Jew owning their Judaism, of a Jew really being committed to building a home for God, not because somebody is imposing us to do it, but because we choose to do it because we are in touch with our own soul, with our own identity. That's only happening now. It's only happening now. We have an opportunity that Jews never, ever had in all of Jewish history, which is to be a Jew for no reason other than just because. It's unbelievable. In temple times, you're a Jew because you see the results. You're getting instant feedback. You see the light born out of your actions. In exile times, you're a Jew because what choice do you have? And you're being always pressured. And that pressure, right? You get that adrenaline rush. Right now, there's nothing compelling us. Nothing in the world. We are the first ones to really own our Judaism. The sages say such a beautiful thing. The Torah tells us that Moses was the most humble man alive. Why was he so humble? Why was Moses, why did he have such humility? You know why? So our sages tell us because he looked throughout all of history until he came across the Jewish souls that will live in the era right before Mashiach comes. He saw their connection to God, and that was his humble pie. He says, oh, I'm not such a big shot compared to these Jews. You know why? Yeah, because it's easy to make a home for God when God shows up to you on Mount Sinai. And it's easy to make a home for God in the temple times when you got prophets running around and you could see the miracles. And it's even easier to make a home for God when you're being persecuted. But the quality of a Jew today in the 21st century, there's nothing in the world other than our own souls telling us, let's connect with God. Let's do a mitzvah. Let's make a home for God. That's power. Even Moses says, this is no match for me. And that's our generation. We are at that last frontier. We are the ones, first time in history, truly capable of going through all three criteria and saying, we got this. We live in the lowest realm. We are in touch with God's essence, and we could make the world into a home for God on our own initiative. Nothing is forcing us. Nothing is compelling us. Only because we get in touch with our souls and do it. Are we doing a good job? I think so. Jews today, there's nothing more precious than the mitzvah that a Jew in the 21st century does. Because when we do a mitzvah, we're doing it just because. We are truly owning that act of bringing God into this world. And who knows, one more mitzvah. We do it just because. Just because, self-driven, no reasons. Reasons are bad. Reasons are compelling reasons. We don't want anything compelling us. We want to connect with God. We want to do good. We want to do a mitzvah just because we are driven to do it. One more mitzvah, hopefully, and Mashiach will come. I want to conclude with the beautiful statement from Maimonides that every human being, every Jew must look at themselves at every moment as if the world is in perfect balance. All it takes is one mitzvah to tip the scales and Mashiach could come. And we are that generation. So l'chaim, l'chaim, we now understand where we are, what our beautiful times are, what the challenge of 2021 is. And let us do that. We will indeed be the ones to truly make a home for God. This is what all of history was marching towards, for our last frontier for us to do. All right, l'chaim, thank you for joining. Have a great night. We'll see you all next week. Next week, we'll already go into the more nitty-gritty
Great.
process of Mashiach. Now we're really gonna, once we understand purpose, then we can go to understanding how indeed will the era of Mashiach unravel. What does it look like? Who is Mashiach? We'll get a little bit more down to earth.
Wow.
How could it be every time we have wonderful and you're making more wonderful next time? It's amazing.
Yeah, that's what you got to do.
That's right.
Only go up. That's what we learned from the menorah. We only get better and better.
Thank you, Rabbi.
That's how it is. All right. Take
Thank
care,
you.
guys. We'll see you. Have a wonderful night.